All right. Hello, everyone. We are back again for another awesome Lyceum at the Accounting Alchemy Network. We are moving strong over here and our community is growing. I'm excited that we're now in 2024. So for those of you who don't know me, again, my name is Matthew Hegum. I'm one of the co-founders of the Accounting Alchemy Network. I am joined today, of course, by Ingrid, one of my co-founders, doing the work that we do to empower accountants to transform the world, right? Really, what we're trying to do is help accountants stand in their power and understand the opportunity that they have to help other business leaders, CEOs, owners, other accountants, even through their influence, prioritize people and planet over profit. So we bring together people who have different thoughts about different things that could enlighten us on whatever our journey is as business professionals and accountants through our lyceums. And so we will be meeting our guest today, Kevin. But before I pass it on to Kevin to introduce himself, over to you, Ingrid, to add some thoughts.
Yes, I'm really, really excited that we get to talk with Kevin Bayuk of Lift Economy today. I've been kind of following your work for a little while, Kevin, Lift Economy, and also I get to be a bit of a fly on the wall on your Next Egg program, which we'll talk about a little bit. And I am really excited about your MBA program, the next cohort of which is launching in March. And so wanting to get the word out about all of that. And before we do, though, I would love it if you would share with our community a bit about yourself and your backstory that led you to creating the Lift Economy.
Great. Thanks. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Ingrid. And thanks everybody for joining. And thanks for being here in this community to leverage your skills and experiences towards creating a world that works for everybody, with no one left out. It's very important. And you could be doing so many other things with your time. So for everybody involved, thank you. My personal background, I mean, just a quick edit on my story. Kind of ancient history, but when I was younger and naive, very young and naive, and had friends that wanted to make movies about the social ecological crisis in the world. And I was, yes, let's make those documentary films, but none of us had any money or experience. And I said, you know what? I'll go make money so we can make movies. And so very young, naive stuff. But I was in the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm a white male and very privileged. And so I'm like, oh, I'll figure out how to start a tech company. That's what you do in the mid 90s in the Bay Area in California. And I ended up doing that a couple times over and, raised tens of millions of dollars and hired hundreds of people and ran companies and never had any fabulous exit to get money to make movies. But, so 10 years in, I had acquired a lot of skills and experience that I didn't want. And I was starting to get very, very depressed. I had a big turn in my life where I left the last company I started, sold my house, sold my car, sold all the film equipment that I had purchased with friends, and went to go live on a farm, basically, and learn how to grow food with my hands and build shelter with my hands and harvest the rainwater, and became very enamored with ecosystemic design and permaculture and radically simplifying my living. And from there, I actually started teaching with my teachers in permaculture design and became so engaged in that activity. I wanted to make permaculture accessible in cities. So around 2005 or so, six, started something called the Urban Permaculture Institute, where I was teaching permaculture design trainings. And in that endeavor, I experienced this interesting phenomenon where I had participants, students say like, oh, I love permaculture. I love this food forest stuff. I love this idea of perennial polyculture, low maintenance, food secure gardens, and all these wonderful things. But I hate my job and I have to pay rent. What do you have to say about that? And something similar. I heard those messages over and over and over again, and was lucky enough to have some friends who we would kind of talk about what is our purpose here? What's the best, highest impact we could have being of service to life? And somewhere deep in the stack, we kind of landed on that the economy, kind of the macro economy and how it shows up as a micro economy and its various institutions around the world is highly implicated in a lot of the suffering in the world. And nothing short of transforming the very nature of the economy to actually work for the benefit of all life would be adequate for really a livable future. And I know that sounds hyperbolic, and I don't want to scare anybody and everybody's blood pressure to rise, but I think it's pretty much self-evident that we live in existential times, that the current economic imperatives of the way in which we meet our needs as humans both are not working. There's 800 million people who are hungry and malnourished yesterday, today, and tomorrow. There's almost 1 billion people without adequate water. There's an ecocidal crisis in the world in terms of what's going on with species and climate change, of course. It's not working, and it's really self-terminating. So we really have to transform the economy. So I became passionate about that. And one of my friends who I was having these discussions with, we said, hey, well, why don't we contribute the rest of our life energy to that mission of transforming the economy to work for the benefit of all life? And so in doing so, we started an organization called Lift Economy and said, we don't know how to do that. You know, it's a big multi-generational thing. It's going to take maybe, hundreds of years. It's going to take efforts of people we don't know. It's much larger than ourselves, but we do know some things, and let's try and help where we can and pick our way at that opportunity the best way we know how. And so that was the genesis of Lift Economy. And so since that time, Lift Economy has grown as a worker-owned cooperative kind of impact consultancy of sorts, providing a variety of services to individuals and organizations that are similarly motivated to provide needed goods and services to their community, but do it in ways that don't externalize harm or degrade their environment or exploit people, but provide needed goods and services in ways that actually repair and restore and actually meaningfully contribute to the benefit of life. And there's a lot of people trying that. I think a lot of people probably watching this are similarly inclined, and it's hard. And it's difficult to intersect with the business as usual economy and like survive. And that's where we try and specialize and develop skills and learning around. So that's a summary of how I got to Lift Economy.
Wow, I love your story, Kevin. And one piece that particularly stands out to me is that turning point that you noted, that feeling of depression. And I feel like that feeling is a feeling that a lot of accounting professionals can probably relate to. Even if they are following the recipe of success, doing everything that our current culture has told us that we're supposed to be doing, and we're making money, we've got the family, the house, the car, the dog, all of the things that we're supposed to be happy, supposed to. We're doing everything right, that everyone's told us that this is how it's done. You're successful, congratulations. So where's the fulfillment? And then we think there's something wrong with us, that it's not working. And I'm wondering if there's anything just a little deeper in your own experience of that, as far as that relatability of that's a very human experience in today's world, that if we're getting that red flag, that's an indicator. And what was the message that you received from that? What's coming to my mind is Reverend Deborah Johnson talks about pain pushes until vision pulls. And it sounds like you had that pivotal moment where you went from pain to vision. And I'm wondering what the choice point, that inflection point was for you.
Yeah, thanks, Ingrid. And for me, I wanted to say it was like a epiphany, a moment in time, but maybe a series of epiphanies is more accurate. But the kind of feeling around it was something along the lines of feeling hopeless and cynical and angsty about like, how are we going to do this? And since that time, a friend of mine, or a friend of ours at Lift Economy, Noni Session, wonderful worker owner at a cooperative called the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative. She's known to say the only crisis in the world is a crisis of imagination. And I definitely was suffering from a crisis of imagination. I didn't see, it was hopeless. I didn't see pathways towards a world that worked. And it was really, for me, maybe not for everybody, but it was really engaging with the land, actually permaculture design, and participating in some primary production of my needs, building shelters with my hands, growing food, actually just participating in the cycles of life that was the start of kind of this dawning shift of like, oh, um, instead of like scarcity of and not knowing how we're going to get ourselves out of this pickle, and like, is it even possible? It seemed impossible to me. And after getting involved in permaculture design and having wonderful teachers who have had amazing global experience of restoring ecosystems, uh, transforming landscapes, uh, practicing in this uh, pedagogical approach to meeting human needs that actually creates what I would call like an abundance. I shifted my entire perspective to seeing the world as not like a crisis. Yes, there are crises, but it's just a tremendous litany of missed opportunities. There's all the solutions, if you will, or the approaches to meeting human needs that could lead to reliable prosperity. They're actually abundant. Uh, there's enough for everybody. I mean, I know Buckminster Fuller was jumping up and down from the 50s saying this, but that message really isn't out there. If I want to talk to people and where I was, if you had talked to me prior to my transition, it's like, is there enough for everybody? I probably would have said, if I was honest, I would have said, I don't know, but I probably would have said, it doesn't seem like it. There's not enough for everybody. After getting involved with permaculture design and kind of participating in the cycles of life more directly, it became self-evident to me that there's enough for everybody. In fact, we've actually not even scratched the surface. Um, Tying that back to the economy, there's things that I could say that we all know to be true, but it's hard to fathom or grapple with because we don't do well with numbers. But here, as accountants, what's the global like militarism spend? Something like $6 trillion. I got involved in a project later in my life, 2014, called Project Drawdown, where we did some measuring, mapping, and modeling of like climate solutions, where it became obvious that if humanity, these are solutions that are peer reviewed and not dependent on research and development, but actually instantiated to at least over 1% of their addressable market to meet human needs for, energy or food, and a whole kind of 80 different approaches to kind of addressing global warming. And it became pretty evident that if you just took a fraction of a significant fraction, but a fraction of that global militarism defense spend and dedicated it to meeting human needs, that we could not only resolve the underlying conditions for global warming, but actually liberate the world into an abundant fecundity, to a quality of living, a standard of living for all humans, a 10 billion person world at a standard of living that none of us have even dreamt of. And that all sounds hyperbolic and like exaggerated and so forth, but that's the shift in perspective that became not just like science fiction or like something that I was hopeful for, but actually self-evident. That, of course, led to a lot of frustration. Like, okay, well, if that's true, how do we get there? But that's what led me to Lift Economy ultimately.
Mm. I'm going to jump in and ask a question, and it might be a little bit of a complex question or maybe a multifaceted question. So I'll do my best to offer it, and then you can grab on what you grab what you think makes sense and go from there. So one of the things that stands out for me in your story is, you said, okay, well, we don't know what the answer is, but we're gonna start this thing and dedicate our lives and do it and sort of figure this out. And then before we jumped on the call, you mentioned the concept of theory of change, and so I think part of what I want to know and would love to hear about is, what is your theory of change, and how does that get practice on a day-to-day basis. And then since starting this work, what have you learned along the way that you're like, oh, okay, yeah, we didn't know this, and then we did learn this thing, and this is what the insight was. I'd love to hear sort of some of that information.
Beautiful. Thank you, Matthew. Yeah, so at Lift Economy, we have an evolving theory of change with some hypotheses based on our learnings. And you're right, it's evolved and been more elaborate and become more detailed and nuanced as we continue to learn. It started with kind of this idea that along the lines of what Noni informed me later with more eloquent language to it, that there's a crisis of imagination. There are human efforts of developing goods or services, providing goods and services to communities in ways that don't create harm, but actually do restore reparative socially and environmentally. Like that exists in the world. It's just mostly culturally invisible. Many people don't know of it. If people talk about enterprise or business or exchange, they might reference Patagonia or maybe B Corps. Well, turns out there's a plurality of initiatives all over the world of people who have figured out different pieces of how to provide for community needs in ways that don't compromise their value, but actually contribute to life. And in both studying those and then having some experience intersecting with the business as usual economy of enterprise formation and capital and hiring people and organizing people and kind of developing initiatives, that our theory of change started by let's help support people who are already working towards developing models of economic activity that can showcase this potential that we believe exists, because not by science fiction, because it exists in certain places in the world. It's just not common. Let's create robust showcase models and then help those models to become adaptively regionally replicable. And so maybe I'll give an example like of something, and Ingrid might remember this from the talk I gave the other day, but in Oregon, in Sherwood, Oregon, outside of Portland, there's a farm. It's a 65-acre farm on the one hand, not too remarkable. They have amazing practices in terms of growing mixed organic biodynamic vegetables through a no-till practice. So actually building up soil carbon and adding biodiversity, and they've introduced rewilding of beavers on the land to actually mitigate through conservation hydrology the kind of the water flows on the land. They have some perennials and berries and some trees and really great practices from biodiversity. It's a beautiful farm, but it's also really interesting that the farm is not unique, but rare in the United States, where many of you probably know farm labor is heavily exploited as a population of people. They're one of about 30 worker-owned farms. So the workers who actually provide the labor on the farm are owners, but actually they're part owners. The ownership structure of the farm also involves other farms and ranches or producers in the Willamette area in the valley there that are also part owners in the farm. And then some of the consumers who buy the food, who consume the food, who eat the produce from the land are also part owners. And so it's what we call a multi-stakeholder cooperative, which actually enables some really interesting things, so that those groups of owners are able to have dialogue and deliberate and make decisions about how much should the food cost, how much should labor be paid, what kind of practices should we do on the farm. And the outcomes are, I think, remarkable and still inadequate because it's challenging, but the labor is paid about twice, the worker owner labor is paid about twice the average wage in the region. Still not enough, in my opinion, but in terms of livability. But remarkably, it's notably different from other farm and ranching efforts in the area. Again, I mentioned some of their environmental outcomes, but they also decided to partially vertically integrate the operation. So they have a small permitted commercial kitchen on site, a small micro marketplace, so that the whole supply web distribution chain, they can actually take any of the profit taking from, recovering food waste and turning it into prepared meals for convenience to match up with the consumer demand. And they have this micro marketplace where they can take the goods from the other producers and sell them alongside the produce in addition to their CSA efforts. And that kind of partial vertical integration and multi-stakeholder cooperative structure enables these outcomes that are better for the land and better for people. And I'm not naive enough to think that the existence of this organization called Our Table changes the food system or changes the world. But if we expand our imagination and say, what if every bioregion in the world had multiple Our Tables, such that farm labor and practices and nutrition and community health and the vibrancy of the landscapes within which we reside could actually be transformed to something that's regenerative and reparative? Now that's a vision that's compelling. And so how do we make the Our Tables of the world succeed? And that was our initial, to be models, showcases, so that they're not culturally invisible. And that's the kind of the original theory of change of Lyft, is let's use our knowledge, skills, experience to support organizations like Our Table to be models. From there, we ran into some interesting things, like Our Table is not unique in that the capitalization of that effort, it requires some resources to be able to develop the opportunity, and capital formation is pretty deep in the stack of business as usual racialized capitalism to exclude certain populations, to mandate liquidity, market rate return. So we actually had to get involved in changing how capital is formed and trying to actually inspire that world. So we created something called the Force for Good Fund, which is its own story and probably its own conversation. But we work a lot with impact investors and philanthropic groups around this idea of how to provide capital resources to communities, entrepreneurs, co-ops, different initiatives around the world in ways that are non-extractive. And that requires a lot of interface with both the accounting, legal, kind of the business as usual infrastructure around capital. And so the learning, like you said, the evolution has become more and more nuanced. We also started other things, like we need to continue to, if showcases exist, we need to tell the stories. So we created a podcast called Next Economy Now to try and tell the stories of what's happening, because we think that's an important, part of the hypothesis, that people just don't know what's going on. There's a gap in kind of the media, if you will. The other things that we kind of came up with, these are adding to the theory of change, and I'm going to get to the Next Economy MBA at the end. But another piece we realized, and this will touch on, Ingrid mentioned this project called the Next Egg. We realized there's these other traps. If capital is a trap of capitalism, there's another trap in business as usual kind of economy. An example of that we met a lot of people who they were scared to change their career, their vocation, to something that was contributing in alignment with their values, because they're like, I have to take this job because I need reliable health care. Those of you outside the United States attending this talk don't know what the heck I'm talking about. I'm sorry, but if you're in the United States, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Like, the embarrassment of the healthcare system in the United States creates this pressure that keeps people trapped in the business as usual economy. So does this idea of retirement. What's going to happen if I'm no longer able-bodied and I need some passive income or whatever to actually meet my needs because of the inadequate resources from the state or Social Security or whatever the structures there. There's traps. It's like, so I have to take a job with reliable health care coverage and a 401k or whatever. And so there's these barriers. And those barriers extend to housing and our relationship to notions of private property and food and other things. So we call that, it turns out in each of those areas, how we address human health, our own health, how we address the notion of retirement, how we address housing, there are alternatives to what are kind of the mainstream business as usual obvious pathways to meet those needs. But the infrastructure to make it easy for somebody to be like, oh, I'm just going to have my healthcare needs met through the local multi-stakeholder cooperative direct primary care clinic with the cooperative insurance. The infrastructure to make that an easy decision, it doesn't exist. And so we created an initiative that we call Next Economy Infrastructure. And that includes a project that Ingrid mentioned, which we could talk about more, called the Next Egg, in collaboration with our friends at the Sustainable Economy Law Center, and Michael Schuman and some others. So infrastructure is critical. All of that. There's other pieces I can talk about the theory of change. Like I said, it's built in attitude, but I wanted to get to one thing that we've landed on as the most critical, one of the most critical things, and probably our legacy project is we started, working with funders and having things like, the aforementioned permanent real estate cooperative or Our Table, these amazing showcase projects. But we realized that what's actually needed is we funders have said, hey, we would fund this if you could start an Our Table in XYZ area. And we're like, okay, well, who's going to do that? And we realized there was a gap of like people, community. And so simultaneously, we had a lot of people coming to us and saying, I want to learn what you're doing at Lift Economy, but I don't yet have a business or a business idea or a co-op per se, or I have an idea, but I want to do it right. Or I've been working with something, for a couple of years, but I want to make sure I'm not compromising any possible impact. Where can I learn about that outside of your technical assistance kind of consulting practice? And so around 2017, we launched something called the Next Economy MBA as a 9-month learning journey to provide that type of learning experience about what we have been learning about. And it's not an MBA. It's not I like to joke, my team hates it when I say this kind of thing. It's about as accredited as Trump University, which means it's not an accredited MBA program. It's a non-institutional learning journey. Why we call it an MBA is kind of like in consultation with the community, our stakeholders, and even our team, we realized we could not find an institutional MBA training that provided this type of education. The content, the topics that we were talking about are the things that we see as missing from even the best of the sustainable green MBA programs out there, which there's some wonderful ones and we've taught at and been invited to teach at, or we know teachers and the faculty, great programs out there, but none of them focus on the types of things that we were sharing through the Next Economy MBA learning journey. And right now that it's still a small community, but we've had about 550 or now with this next one starting up to about 600 people who will have either taken or are taking the Next Economy MBA training. And there's something that's happening internally where we're realizing how potent it is to have this community in this alumni community and communicating with each other, where we still believe in our theory of change and we still do technical assistance, capital formation work. That's still the bulk of our like day-to-day. But the Next Economy MBA, in our mind's eye, we can see once that community is 1,000 people, 5,000 people, 10,000 people, the power of that group as a lever for change is probably going to be, as far as we can tell now, our greatest contribution to the development of the next economy.
Oh, Kevin, I am nerding out over everything you've been sharing, especially when you started talking about regenerative agriculture and, the financial models behind regenerative agriculture. Being someone who grows most of my own food on a little 2-acre farm in Southern Oregon, you're just speaking to my heart. And I was chatting with the members who are watching live, one of whom specializes in accounting for agriculture. And so just hearing the things that you're sharing about the multi-stakeholder practices, and there's so much richness of education and experience here. And a huge piece of what I feel like the accounting industry is currently missing is we've got accounting professionals who might be interested in supporting businesses to make these kinds of transitions to a more Lift Economy, Next Economy mindset and model, but they don't know how. And now you've created this MBA program to offer them the pathway of here's how. And a couple of the things that has blown my mind when looking into your MBA program myself is that it's very affordable. I mean, compared to a lot of other programs in continuing education and things like that out there, other certifications and such like that are a lot more expensive. So like it's accessible, and you make it even more accessible for BIPOC, which is just thrills me that that is there. And in addition to that, the alumni program, if it's very unique to find a program that once you take the program, you're welcome back anytime, that it's a lifetime membership essentially of like, please come back, remain part of the community, and that it's not trying to engage and re-engage people on a perpetual subscription model. I'm so inspired by that. And I would love to hear some of the discussions on your team that help to evolve those kinds of decisions. What does that look like to have the kind of culture that creates those kinds of programs? Because I'm looking forward to partaking of your programs personally and would love to get as many accounting professionals as possible engaged in these discussions.
Ooh, and we'd love more accounting professionals.
We'll
Because
talk
there's just
about
a
that too.
yeah,
How
dire
can we
need.
continue to play together? We've
Yeah,
been
yeah.
hatching, plotting and scheming.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think I think you used the word, but our values as an organization, our culture, are really important in informing our approach to anything that we do, including developing an educational offering or learning journey. Examples of those values in terms of our value for impact and service with discernment, kind of we value accessibility. We want to make what we share accessible and relevant. We value transparency as well. And so when it comes down to like, well, in terms of reciprocity for the team at Lift Economy, being able to meet our needs as we interface with the business as usual economy, we do a couple things with our culture as an organization as we try and support each member of our team to actually reduce our reliance on the cash economy for meeting our needs as employees. So just this year, I think across the board, maybe -1, we actually reduced our salaries voluntarily. And so, salary reduction in terms of cash compensation in alignment with our values, so that means that we don't have to charge as much, if you will, for our fee-for-service work or our educational offerings. And our intention is, instead of for our wages to increase as a team, our intention is for our wages to continue to decrease, but our livelihood, our quality of life to actually increase. So we support, that's that next economy infrastructure piece. We try and support each other as a team in trying to place voluntary limits on our needs to intersect with the cash economy and meet more of our needs through mutual aid or the informal economy.
I
And
want to
there's
drill into that just a little bit more,
sure, go
because
for it.
knowing that our audience is
Yeah,
accounting professionals,
yeah,
I'm betting that there's a handful of people who might be, on here or
yeah.
watching the replay who are just getting a do. If you'd like to make a call, please hang up and dial again. Like, does not compute. What do you mean
Yeah, yeah.
decreasing salary while increasing quality of life? Like, how do we support people in rewiring our programming, our neural synapses around the potential of that concept?
I'll give an example, but might not be the best example, and it might be intimidating as well because it's taken us a while. There's simpler things that we could talk about, but for one of our team members, so we did produce a surplus or a profit. We have in the past as a co-op. A lot of worker-owned cooperatives tend towards just a break even. But in a year where we had some larger contracts and we had some surplus, uh, we actually use that surplus to invest in a capital asset. For one of our educational offerings is around how to transform culture or our living to be more in alignment with an economy that works for the benefit of all life. It's called Next Economy Living, new project, part of the theory change. Won't talk about it too much, but we invested in a tiny home. So, it's a 30-foot long, 8.5 feet wide or whatever, tiny home. And one of our employees who works on the Next Economy Living project to kind of document what it means to downsize, but downsize joyfully. They kind of report on their efforts, but they get to live in the tiny home at way, way below market rates. In exchange for this living asset, their salary, their needs for cash compensation also reduced because living in California, where that employee lives, the primary cost, one of the primary costs is housing. And so their housing costs are now, a fraction of what the market rate housing costs would be. And so in exchange for that investment of the company to provide this living asset as part of our efforts to change the economy, that person, their salary requirements are likewise a fraction of what they otherwise would be receiving in terms of cash compensation. So their quality of life in terms of housing security, their alignment, the housing in alignment with their values, goes way up. So their standard and quality of life has gone way up. Meanwhile, their cost, their cash cost to the company has gone way down. And there's some fine tuning in there to find out, well, how far does the cash compensation go down versus the cost of living go down, and is it a net, or and we're still working those things out because it's all kind of new stuff. But in general, we look at any way in which we can support each other as humans to, for example, like food, to, food for food security, how we can, collectively as a team use our networks and relationships to invest in, CSA is something we've done as a team at one point, is invest. Each individual kind of collaboratively built a relationship with a farm, and we invested in kind of a CSA program to provide for food, and that reduces our cash needs. So each individual who did that was able to reduce their salary kind of commensurately, because their needs to purchase food using market rate kind of exchanges was also reduced. So we look for ways to well, health would be another one, just to bring it up. So we do have a program that's ACA compliant. This starts to get into the technicalities of the distinctions of like medical cost sharing networks, minimum essential coverage plans that are ACA compliant, and direct primary care kind of benefits, which becomes really a challenge without kind of accounting savvy about how we can maintain compliance with the IRS, other legal structures. But their accounting actually becomes really integral to navigating how we're able to provide benefits that do reduce the overall cost to the employees while maintaining the incentives for preventive wellness amongst the team, and to account for those as where we encounter fringe benefit type of accounting needs to account for those benefits as compensation or not. So we look for every opportunity we can so that we can continue to reduce salaries, cash compensation needs, but increase employee wellness, health, reduce our cost of living, increase our nutrition, invest in time off, other types of mutual aid or support amongst the team. So there is a lot of nuance in there. You're right that the first mind twist is like, how can we? It's just even a thought experiment. How can, which is the basic question? What would it look like for my quality of life to improve, where my cash needs are reduced, my needs for cash salary compensation are reduced, And if you just ask that as a thought experiment, there's a lot of things that will pop up, and most of them will seem impossible. But rather than being impossible, I would say that they're actually just very challenging, and they take time, and that the infrastructure to make them self-evidently easy doesn't really exist. And we need to build out an experiment to develop that infrastructure to make it easier and easier. But rather than just saying it's impossible, throw up our hands and say, just more cash compensation. That's the only way to get personal security. That's what the business as usual kind of capitalism wants to trap you in. But it's not true.
Yeah. Thank you for offering that kind of very explicit example of what it looks like in practice. Because I think what we're trying to figure out for our community is what are some of the examples of this practice and how can you begin to implement these things? And I think one of the things that we acknowledge at the AAN is that, we are in this age of transition, right? And so there's going to be some tough work to do around changing systems. It's not going to happen overnight. And it's going to bring up some big questions that are going to challenge a lot of people about a lot of different things in a lot of different ways, right? So I love, like, even just the act of asking that question as a team, right? I'm sure brings up a lot of the things that can create the conversation. And so I guess I want to just kind of be more explicit in my question for you. It's like, okay, so we have a community of accounting professionals, and thank you for acknowledging that we are needed in this conversation.
Totally.
Right. So we have this community of accounting professionals. They're like wanting to step forward, maybe take some action, maybe start to have some conversations with their clients that might begin to open up the dialogue around this transformation that could occur. And so I guess imagine yourself sitting in front of a room of a bunch of accountants, which you are, right? What would you say to them right now, to those who want to step forward and start this dialogue with one of their clients, for example?
Yeah. Well, to start the dialogue with one of their clients, that depends on kind of a lot of context for the client. And I'll come back to that by referring to, in our theory of change at Lyft, or our privilege at Lyft, is that we've organized working with organizations, individuals that are kind of already asking, how can I transform the nature of my institution to conform with my values, to be an agent of change for the overall economy? And so they're already there. If you have a client that maybe is approaching things from a scarcity, a mindset of a real mindset of being embedded in the business as usual economy, that, hey, the purpose of business is to create a livelihood, and maybe to create a profitable livelihood so that there's surplus that I can save or invest for the future for myself, my family, or community. And that kind of maintaining compliance, not necessarily being an agent of change. I doubt any of your clients that any of you would meet with are probably cynically trying to externalize harm intentionally, but they might be kind of trapped in this crisis of imagination, where they might not be ready for. And so you could try and have, we don't make it our goal to try and inspire change by being a provocateur with people who aren't asking to change. So let's see, trying to think. I have two different teachers. One teacher says, "Don't bloody your knuckles on doors that aren't ready to be opened." I don't like that one. One of my friends and colleagues, teachers, Starhawk, says, bio support, by invitation only. Be invited. If you're invited to help advance a vision, then you go there. If it's not, if you're trying to create the invitation, that's really hard work. It may not be fruitful. So if you have a client that's like not looking to asking you how they can change, then there's a different conversation there. I think if that were the case, I would say from our theory is to try and inspire the imagination by providing stories and examples of what is. Like, oh, there's this group over here, they're doing this. Is that attractive? Is this interesting? What kind of world do you think about leaving for your children or grandchildren or your community? Some of the like kind of baseline alignment questions for what's your vision for the future? What would you like to have happen in your region? Or, if you could wave a magic wand and your business could be whatever it could be, and have the most impact in the world in terms of beneficial impact or whatever, how you define impact, what would it look like? And so there's some appreciative inquiry or just general ideas about provoking change compassionately. Uh, but if you are in the privileged situation like us, where there's a group says, I want to do whatever I can. What can we do? Tell me, accountants. Tell me what I can do. What's the most radical thing? We want to be agents of transformation. No reform here. We want to push the envelope for what's possible. Well, that's the position that Lyft Economy finds itself in. And if any of you are in that situation, then there might be some things that I could say that are important. And again, it really depends on who the business is or who the client is. And a lot of it kind of intersects not just accounting, but also has to do with um, uh, what we talk about in the Next Economy MBA is kind of principles that then go into examples. And so as an accountant, your work would intersect with a number of the potential principles. Some of the principles include essentially in diverse and inclusive ownership, like who owns the asset, the outcomes of any surplus that's generated from the organization. How is that distributed? So there's legal and formation questions there, but then there's kind of accounting questions as well. If there are multiple classes of members or multiple shareholder, types of shares, and how dividends are distributed, how that decision making is made. A lot of that ends up involving accountants, and there's tax consequences, as you know, to some of the decision making around how benefits are allocated to workers, to the community. And this all presumes there are profits or that there's surplus to be allocated. But those are really consequential decisions. And when you get to the more radical constructions of, I mentioned multi-stakeholder cooperative as an example earlier, where you have multiple members with diverse governance and diverse allocation of benefits rights, the accounting for that can be challenging. And in our experience, there's unfortunately a dearth of accountants who will be proactive in saying, this is what's possible. You could do this, if you wanted to, rather than kind of business as usual, kind of the standard approaches to allocating benefits. There's a lot of possibilities that are unknown to a lot of business owners, entrepreneurs, teams. And so as an accountant, you're in a powerful position to be able to say, hey, if you wanted to allocate dividends or resources to the community, here's ways you could do it. This is what the consequences would be from a tax perspective. That type of insight is really challenging for a lot of entrepreneurs who are just trying to create goods and services for their community. So diverse and inclusive ownership would be one area that I think is really consequential. I think if you have another principle in the Next kind of MBA we talk about is kind of democratic governance, and that the governance of an organization in terms of how resources are allocated, not just surplus, but like expenses are allocated, how budgeting is done. The whole world of open book management and transparency is something that a lot of co-ops gravitate towards. But a lot of that requires, it's very uncommon for co-ops to have more than literacy about kind of financial management and interpretation of the financial situation for financial sustainability. And the expertise is often abdicated to professionals, and many accounting professionals, as you all probably know, don't kind of aren't necessarily sensitive to how do we make this information available to the diverse stakeholders in the company, all the workers or other community members, so that we can have democratic governance. And so this abdication, so the accountants play this really powerful role of being potential guides for open book management and supporting decision making, dialogue, deliberation about what should we do with our budget, or should we make this investment, um, and all the various consequences of pricing decisions and any number of decisions that the organization might make in terms of orienting towards their impact vision. So those are a couple of examples. There's many other examples that I would probably bring up. One of the big needs I see in my practice in particular, I work with a lot of impact investors and foundations. And from an accounting perspective, I mean, just today, like came across the groups who want to do unconventional type of either example. They're like, should we do a recoverable grant for this one, or should we do a no interest loan? And there's consequences from a tax perspective for the decision. And I'm not a accredited accountant or legal professional, so I can provide strategy, but ultimately I have to say, and then we'll take this to your counsel or to your CPA to get their professional opinion. And that I am embarrassed to say that a lot of the time I end up having to educate accounting professionals and legal professionals on what's possible, because their training is constrained to look at what's usual or normal, or I would say risk averse, but it's like risk illiterate. It's like just focusing on what they've done before, which is I suppose a form of risk aversion. So we need accountants who are open and literate about what's possible on the edges or unconventional edges, especially in the world of capital and working with foundations and impact investment groups.
I don't know if anyone's seeing it on the replay, but like the clapping hand emojis floating up the screen and like the chat getting lit up. Yeah. Everything that you're saying, Kevin, just so resonates. And this is exactly why we wanted to get your MBA program in front of the Accounting Alchemy audience, because I feel like these are the people who are at least curious about how do we do this. And some of the conversations that you and I have had just briefly around, we're at the bleeding edge of making all this stuff up. Like, this is how change happens. These kinds of conversations are what change the world. And it's kind of mind-blowing to be involved in that kind of discussion of, oh, hey, this can actually shift things. And this is where it starts, and getting involved in the MBA program. And then what? Because after the MBA program, there's more education that needs to be created and drilled into, particularly by accounting professionals, so that we have the CPAs and the attorneys and the financial advisors and the economists coming together to say, no, really, we are the professionals who are the experts in these things, and we're the ones changing them now, so that people who aren't CPAs don't have to come in and educate the CPAs on how to think outside the box of their training. Because when it comes right down to it, a lot of accounting professionals spent years in school being programmed on how to maintain the status quo and never to question it. How do we break out of that programming and use our accounting education to begin accounting for what we want to be held accountable for in our world, which needs to be our values and beliefs? And I feel like everything that you've said speaks to that. And we've had conversations just briefly around, like, what does it look like even after the MBA program to establish continuing education just for accounting professionals? And how can we partner and create this and just have a rising tide that raises all ships? And these are the conversations that are happening. And for anyone watching the replay of this discussion, we need your voices in those conversations. It doesn't have to be just a handful of people in the front of a room. There's no limit to the number of thought leaders that can be in a room. That's a scarcity mindset. Let's break out of that And anyone who's experiencing a bit of imposter syndrome around like, I don't know what I'm doing. None of us know what we're doing. We're making this up as we go. That's what thought leaders do. They make this stuff up. So let's make some stuff up together. Let's get in the sandbox and get dirty. And not everything's going to work the first time. We're going to try things. We're going to make it up. We're going to experiment. And then we'll say, okay, what worked, what didn't, and take it from there. So recognizing we have just a few minutes left, I would love to make sure that we give everyone some direction on how to find your program. And of course, we put it in the chat along with the promo code, which is AANMB and then the @ where whoever's watching this can get 10% off of the Next MBA tuition. And you can find that at go.lifteconomy.com/next MBA. And if you're catching the replay, we'll also make sure that that's in the details on YouTube. We've put it in our newsletter. We've put it in our Facebook and LinkedIn groups. So anyone who's watching this, there's places that you can go. And if you have trouble finding it, please feel free to reach out. We're happy to point you in the next direction, in the right direction, in the Next Economy direction. But also, Kevin, you have an information call coming up at the end of this month. Will you give us a little bit more detail about that?
Yes, and I'll drop the link into the chat. So we provide kind of free kind of introductions to the Next Economy MBA for people who are Next Economy MBA curious, to meet some of the facilitators, and basically an opportunity to ask any specific questions that you might be holding. And there is a sign up here. The URL, I'll drop it in the chat. The next one is Thursday, the 29th of February at 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. In the URL go.lifteconomy.com/MBA-free-intro-event. Yeah, and you can submit questions in advance, so we try and really understand what people are curious about. And it doesn't necessarily have to be about the MBA. This is just an opportunity to interact with some of the people who are involved in producing and facilitating the program. And what I'm guessing is that if it's somebody from this community, is the Next Economy MBA, when we call it a learning experience or a learning journey, I'm not trying to just use like fanciful rhetoric around it. It's like, it's a community where we're learning together. We learn every cohort. I learn new things from people who are joining. So there are lots of opportunities to contribute, as well as learn not just from the Lift Economy facilitators, but from other people in the program.
Oh, Kevin, thank you for your time today. We really do appreciate it. So for those of you who are watching, please follow up with some of the resources that we've provided in this, or things that we've talked about. This is an incredible opportunity to step into your learning and your own growth on this journey of becoming a regenerative accounting professional. As Ingrid highlighted before, we are at the beginning stages of this work. This is bleeding edge, as she says. So if you really want to step into your potential, explore this program as an opportunity to do that. And that being said, one last thing, for those of you who are new members to our community, I want to remind you about our AAN playbook. That's a great place for you to start if you're new to this community and not quite sure where to begin your journey. We have some awesome resources there and a path laid out for you that makes it super easy to get involved, get engaged, and maybe even one day lead your own Lyceum just like this, where you invite the guest. And if you're watching this on YouTube, please go to our website. We'll put all the links below in the description. And the last thing I'll say is spread the word. If you know any other accounting professionals out there who are aligned with this work, or even just business leaders who appreciate the possibility of a regenerative future, please let them know about our organization, Kevin's organization, all of the great work and the great content that we're forming here at the Accounting Alchemy Network. And so with that, thank you so much, Kevin. Have a wonderful day. Ingrid, always a pleasure.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Kevin. Have a great one.
Thank you all. Bye.